occasionally invite someone who is an elected official to be our Sunday speaker. And the answer is pretty simple, and you probably know this, but we are all seeking to serve people. We're not seeking to serve special interests. Our lives, all of us on this call, including Oscar, we are here to serve people. So I'm going to introduce him in his own words. Oscar says, I consider myself lucky to have been born and raised in Santa Barbara, the American Riviera. I'm a proud alumnus of our quality local education system, having graduated with honors from San Marcos High School, followed shortly by my graduation from the School of Media Arts at Santa Barbara City College, where I earned 3 national awards. I went on to earn a degree from UCSB, where I received high honors in the film department and won UCLA's Best Documentary Award for my senior film project. In my 19-year journalism and videography career, I worked for ABC, Warner Brothers, Univision, Santa Barbara City College, and UCSB, among others, and received more than 30 national and regional nominations and awards. That career also involved working with local government and public service sectors and media coverage of local politics. Those experiences prompted me to step up and serve as the first millennial elected to the Santa Barbara City Council. It's my pleasure to represent my district and my hometown. As a bilingual member of the council, I'm able to engage a large portion of Santa Barbara's diverse population, including those who previously felt underrepresented. I strongly believe that one's career should be more than just a way to pay bills. It should also help define a person. I trust that the decisions I make as council member will define me as a representative strongly committed to the community I serve. Well, this quiet presence is among us quite frequently. Oscar also does video when we Zoom in person at 1915 Chapala Street. So, everybody, can you just give a grateful applause as we receive Oscar Gutierrez?
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate that, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. Um, yeah, it's been it's kind of a bittersweet day because my father passed away in 2011, and there's not a day that goes by where I don't think about him and what it was like for him to be a father. I don't have children yet, but one day I'm sure I will. And I just think about how my father had it, and he grew up very, very poor in Mexico and immigrated to Santa Barbara in the 60s, and then had to survive in a community, in a culture that he wasn't accustomed to, and with a language, and never going to school. So the type of work he had to do was very difficult. And he had 4 children with my mom. I'm the youngest of those 4, and I look back and think about how difficult it must have been for him to provide for us in a country he wasn't familiar with, and dealing with growing up with kids that were speaking a language that he didn't understand. It was just an example of, for me, about what it is to be a leader and a provider, and it obviously influenced me to try to lead and provide for my community as an elected representative. And even though there were moments growing up where I felt like my father was kind of rough on us, but now as an adult, I think back about the way he was raised, and he wasn't even half as bad as how rough his father was on him. So I guess it's all relative, right? So that's a lesson for me to learn when I have kids, about when they start criticizing me. I'll just take that into account. But also when I get criticized as a leader, I have to think about the context and what it's like to to be perceived a certain way by people when you are just trying to do your best and do what's good for the entire community as a whole. Because there were some times where I felt like my father was like personally um spiting me, I guess. But now as an adult, I look back and I'm like, well, he was thinking about the family as a whole, so he couldn't just like cater to me specifically. He had to cater to the whole family. And it also makes me think about you know how religious leaders in the past, through the thousands of years, how they too were you know criticized and judged for the way they were trying to lead people. um but they held true to their values and just try to preach what they thought the higher powers um would want us to abide by. And yeah, the role as a father in its connection to religious beliefs, I think almost go without saying, right? um and also to just being a leader. And it's hard because like I said, I'm not a father yet, but in a weird way I feel like being an elected official is giving me a little bit of practice of what that's going to be like, because I know it's not the same and it's not easy. um my brother has 3 children of his own, so I kind of watch him and see what it's like for him to raise children. And obviously from a distance I could see how challenging that is, but also how rewarding it is when they win awards and they're getting accolades for their efforts. And I could see on his face how proud he is when that happens. And it's kind of the same on the council when we make decisions and the people end up reaping awards from those decisions. That to me brings me pride, and it makes me feel like I'm doing the right thing. And yeah, my sense of wanting to be a productive member of our community definitely comes from my father, and how selfless he was to us, always working, always trying to make sure that we had what he didn't. Very self-sacrificing. um Sometimes to a fault. He did work a lot, but it was to make sure that we had a better life than he did. That's what I have to continually realize. So again, it wasn't just because he was trying to you know make us feel neglected. He didn't want us on the street. He did. And yeah, it's a good example for me of what it is to be a role model. And it makes me want to be more of a role model for our community, especially now that we're all aware that not having a father figure in your life could be detrimental to some people. um, and and I'm trying to just make sure that I fulfill my role as an elected official in our community. So I'm always trying to show up as many as I can, speak to as many people as I can, and just make myself accessible and available and responsive. And yeah, that kind of all again from my father, just being there as much as possible and trying to provide as much as possible. And he was a very religious man, so that also, I'm sure that responsibility came down from his religious beliefs. And we would go to church every Sunday, and yeah, that installed my fundamental beliefs about caring for one another and being honest and trying to do good for not just me but for everyone around me. And just want to thank all you fathers out there that are fulfilling your role. And again, want to thank Dr. Moore for inviting me to speak. But yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to say is we all got to be good positive role models for our families and our community. and having days like this give us a moment to acknowledge that and give thanks. And again, I thank you all.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much, Oscar. And Roy has a question or two here.
I do, I do, and it is fun to for those of us who have seen you in our in-person gatherings, just sitting there quietly or standing there quietly behind the computer and the camera, but now to learn a bit more of your background and of your commitments. And thank you, Oscar, for being here and for making yourself available for our questions. The first one that struck me as you were talking about your father and the lessons you learned from him, you said that there were times when he had to, and I'm paraphrasing and maybe reading some in here. There are times when he had to make decisions for the good of the family that may not have felt like the good for you. And so my first question for you is, when have you, in your role as a city council person, looked at what you were doing and felt like you had to make a decision or work for passage of a policy that was good for the larger community, but may have been less than good for some individuals in the community?
Yeah, so it's happened a few times, but the most recent one was, last Tuesday we finalized the budget for this coming year. Mm-hmm. And we do it every year, but it's always a really hard couple of weeks leading up to that meeting when we make our final decisions, because all these different departments are coming to us, members of the community are coming to us and either asking us for money, more money, or asking us not to cut any more money than what they're already receiving. But it's hard because, our financial director is telling us that, we're facing a $3 million deficit and we need to make up that money somewhere. And we don't want to draw money out of our emergency reserves, because we need that for an emergency like a fire, an earthquake, or something like that. So it's hard because there are programs like after school programs, for example. One of them was being suggested by city staff to cut the funding. And I know for a fact, because I was a kid that went to the schools, public schools here, how important after school programs are, because there are times where my parents were working 2 to 3 jobs just to support all 4 of us, and they weren't home, and they didn't necessarily want us to be home alone or want us to be out somewhere unsupervised. So they would tell us to stay at school, and there were after school programs that we could stay there until about 6 o'clock or what have you, and then come home. And by then one of them would be home. And it's, to me personally, cutting that didn't sit well with me at all. I wasn't accepting that, So then we had to come up with a solution, like, okay, well, if we're not going to cut that, where are we going to cut it from so that we could keep that going? So we all decided that there's a lot of programs that we fund, like Fiestas, Solstice, Visit Santa Barbara, which is our travel bureau, and a few others. We give millions of dollars of the city budget to them. So we decided that in order to not cut this after school program and a few other things, then we would evenly have them cut 5% of the budget that we're already giving them. So that money was enough to be able to save the after school program. So those programs that we cut from, each one individually, I have close ties to, because one of them was my former employer, which was TV Santa Barbara, which is where I got all the experience in film and video, and it's a public television station. And I'm a very proud supporter of public television and public broadcasting. And that one personally was like, oh, you know, I know how hard it is for them already to operate, and we're going to ask to cut 5% of their budget. But again, I'm looking at the greater good, right? Like, I'm looking at the future generations that are going to be affected by not having this after school program. So I had to just, you know, swallow my personal pride, I guess, and vote in favor of cutting 5% across the board so that this after school program could survive and serve these young kids. And yeah, so that's one example where I personally didn't want to cut the 5% across the board, but I also didn't want to cut the after school program. So it was a decision that benefited, in my opinion, the greater good of the community by keeping this after school program for these kids and being as even as possible across the board to all the other organizations that have other methods of generating revenue. So it was the most I don't know, comparable decision that we can make.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one more question and then open it for everybody else. What do you think is the biggest issue facing Santa Barbara right now?
Oh, that is a good question. Some of the issues overlap each other, you know, when we talk about the cost of living and the homelessness situation, housing, the lack of housing.
Affordable housing.
Correct. Affordable housing. Yeah, they all kind of like overlap each other in certain areas. But to me right now, it's been brought to my attention again and again by my residents that we need to do more for the youth in our community, because the youth, especially coming out of the pandemic, they really felt just kind of enclosed. You know, obviously we all were, right? We had that period where we weren't really leaving our houses, but for them, going through the years of school that they had, staring into a screen, not having access to their campuses, that really, I mean, we're just now starting to see the effects of that, and we're not probably going to see the effects of that for like a couple more years now. But it's already like kind of negative effects, right? So I want to make sure that we are acknowledging that and taking steps as a representative government to address that. So my focus personally, what I think is one of the most important issues is what we're doing to help our youth. You know, we're trying to work with other governmental agencies like the school district to collaborate to address it, because obviously the school districts, that's all they do is work with the youth, you know. So we're trying to see where we could fill in the gaps where they can't, especially obviously after school, because you know they're responsible for school, but then after school they're not necessarily responsible for what happens to the youth. And that's where we can, as the city government, can step in with after school programs or events that could be held around the city to give them a safe place to go, so they're not, you know, stuck at home staring into a screen, or they're wandering the streets, getting into trouble. They could have a safe place where they can learn or just feel not alone, you know. And yeah, so my colleagues and I have been regularly discussing that and directing city staff to come back to us as to whether or not we could provide employment opportunities for these youths, whether we can have places where they could go that are run by the city, where they could go and just be safe, or plan events for them to just kind of be acknowledged that the community cares about them. Because right now what I keep hearing is that there's a large percentage of the youth that feel like they're not being acknowledged, and I want to make sure that we address that.
Thank you, Oscar. Who else has a question they'd like Oscar to look at? Okay, I see one hand here, and I'm sorry, I'm really bad with remembering names. So if you don't have your name.
We can't hear you.
I'm Rosie.
Oh, there
I'm
you go.
Rosie.
There we
Okay,
go,
hi.
Rosie.
Yes, hi,
I'm sorry.
hi. There was let me see. Was it in the Independent where they did an article on you, bro?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was good. That was good. I wanna thank you first and foremost, for being here with us, all right? And tener el corazón de padre. Yeah, I
Yes,
like
yes.
that. You know what? So I'm gonna say a couple of things. Okay, first I want to say I
Rosie, can you move your
I
camera just a little bit? We only see your forehead.
oh, I'm sorry. Can you see me now?
Now we see your eyes.
Okay,
A little
better?
bit more. A little.
More?
Yeah, almost.
Okay. I don't know how to do this. Is it better?
Yes, that's
All
good.
right, sorry about that. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so I tripped out, Oscar, on what you had mentioned about the role that religion played. Okay, so I'm sure uh well, I'll just put it very simply. um I'm assuming that that um you're you're probably raised Catholic.
Mhm.
And I just like I remember as a little girl, uh you know uh, well, my father, God rest his soul, basically felt very different about the role of the church in he loved God. He believed in God. We were raised for a short time as Catholic, but we all were born again, Christian throughout some point in our lives and stuff. But at any rate, I just kind of tripped out on the way that you said it, because I just think like, dang man, if I were to think about it, like remembering, and even just knowing still now the role of the man religiously through the Catholic faith, and how anti and brutal and violent toward people in general, women specifically. So I had to state that. All right. So liberation theology, bro. The other thing that I wanted to say is that having lived in Santa Barbara, I'm not currently there and haven't been for many years, but having worked in the community in various roles, social roles, um, there has always been a lack of support for empowering and youth. And the reality of the matter, as I can still see it today, is that there's a lot of old money there in Santa Barbara. There's a fuckload of old money. And I remember going to meetings, and this was over 20 years ago, and like having comments made to me about, and I'm also, I'm also, I gotta say, I'm also a gaucho. Okay, so we
So
gaucho
go
back,
go
even
ahead,
though
Rosie.
I don't
But
know. But bottom line is, the support. I want to thank you for fighting as hard as you are, because I know it's a battle. You have a lot of older, and I'm gonna say white folks who are anti growth and development and support, for the people of color there. And so how do you feel about that?
Yeah, no, that's one of the reasons why I got inspired and determined to serve on the city council, because growing up, like I remember growing up, we never talked about our local government. We never talked about the mayor or the city council. And it wasn't until I was older when I started to realize that. And the reason why, it was because it was never like, we never felt like they cared about us. So we never talked about it, and it was never like something that was ever discussed to us or brought to us. So that bothered me, because, going through high school and learning through government class about how the government's supposed to work, I was like, well, that's not how I felt like it was working for us. And when the district elections became a thing in Santa Barbara in 2015, that's when I was like, okay, well, this is more equitable. This makes it easier for people like me to be able to run for office and get elected and serve our local government. And yeah, in 2018 is when I decided to run for city council. And if it wasn't for the district elections, yeah, most likely than not, I would not be voted for citywide, for sure, not citywide. But because it was specifically zoned for the West Side, the community that raised me, right? Like almost every other house I knocked the door of, they knew who I was, because they saw me literally grow up. Like they saw me learn to walk on the West Side and ride my bike on the West Side and to drive on the West Side. Like I went to all the stores and I would talk to them, and yeah, so they knew who I was and they trusted me, and they knew that I came from this part of town, and I knew the people that lived here, and that I would do my best to make sure that they get representation. And yeah, if it wasn't for, like, for example, the leadership prior to 2015, they knew what district elections were. 100% they knew what district, like, there's been district elections for decades, right? But they didn't do anything about it. They didn't do anything about it until there was a lawsuit facing the city for it not being equitable. And then because of that lawsuit, they're like, okay, let's do it to avoid getting sued and it costing us money. It took money, the risk of losing money, for them to do it, as opposed to it just being the right thing to do. And yeah, so and who was the leadership at the time? They're all mainly people that came from a Caucasian background or a privileged background. So yeah, what your sentiment is definitely valid, and I acknowledge it. And if it wasn't for people who fought, who threatened lawsuits, right, I wouldn't be here, right now, serving the community. So yeah, and then to go back to your point that you made earlier about growing up Catholic. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I grew up going to church, and as a kid, it was kind of, it's a weird way of saying it, but it was scary. I didn't feel like, I don't feel I didn't feel welcome then, but like when I go to this church, this service, like all I feel is love and welcome. You know what I mean? And I've been to other churches where it's like that. But like, yeah, no, I get what you were saying 100%. And trust me, yeah, I live by the good parts of religion and faith, not the other stuff. Yeah, the other stuff I feel is very problematic.
I see David
Thank you
has
so
his
much.
hand up. Yeah, thank you, Oscar. David?
Good morning. I hope I have the bandwidth here. Oscar, I think you answered one question I had, which is I just couldn't help but think I wish you were my city councilman, but I don't think you are because I'm up in the foothills.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think if you're in the foothills, the foothills, it depends on how far into the foothills you are, because you could be the county, or you could be Christian Snet in Christian Stennis. But the district elections basically means that we have a focused area to
Yeah.
to serve, but we are city council members overall. So it doesn't even matter that you don't live in my district. I'm still obligated to help. It's not like if you were like, hey, there's a street light that's out on my block. Can you do something about it? I'm not going to be like, nah, it's not my block, not my problem, man. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to be like, yeah, let me report that to Public Works and they'll send somebody out there to switch out the bulb, you know? So, yeah, don't ever hesitate to reach
Yeah,
out
I
to
think
any of us.
I could. Okay, thank you for clarifying that. What I really wanted to say, though, was just how inspired I was by your story and your family story. I want to congratulate you for your wonderful successes, plural, for your career. And also just to comment on how inspired I am to hear about your own father who sacrificed so much and worked so hard. And hallelujah, look at what he accomplished in you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, one thing I forgot to mention was that he worked as a custodian at UCSB for years until the day he died. And I had just applied to UCSB and I applied to UCSB before he passed away, but then he passed away, and then a few months later they responded saying that I was accepted. And I just remember thinking how bittersweet it was, because I was looking forward to being able to go to the college where my dad worked, and I was able to like see him on campus and have lunch with him and stuff. But yeah, obviously that didn't happen. I still got to go to UCSB, and being there was again bittersweet, knowing that my dad spent the last years of his life there. And then my college graduation was actually on Father's Day, so again it was like another bittersweet, like not only did he work there, not only was he my father, but it was also on Father's Day, and it was just like this really emotional day for me. But it was sweet because we were all thinking about him, so it was like he was there anyway. So yeah, so like,
Well,
respect for dads.
I just like to say that as I'm a Scottish Yankee with roots going back to the early colonial times, and as such, I'd like to say that our country needs more immigrants like your dad.
Thank
For
you.
sure.
Appreciate that.
For sure. Well, look, everybody. We're going to give everybody a chance to go off and do your Father's Day things and your Juneteenth things. But and Kenichi's going to lead us in communion. But first, let me say that I'm really happy, Oscar, that we're not scary. And Roy, was that all? Anything?
As Oscar was talking, I was thinking of a friend, and this will go someplace, who was a religious advisor for the National Body of Planned Parenthood. And he used to say that abstinence only works until it doesn't, at which time you have serious, serious problems. And I think an uninvolved government works until it doesn't, when we really need something in our community. And then we need an activist government. And I thank you, Oscar, for working to make the local government that way. And thank you for all you do.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So, Kenichi.
Yes. Again, Oscar, thank you so much. Just a privilege for us to intersect with politicians and people of all walks of life. And we are so much better as we expose to these experiences. And as we come to the Lord's table, two things comes to my mind. One is representation, and the other is good for the whole. And when I think of those two elements, I think of Jesus as he gave himself, representing human race, and what he allowed himself to be done to him, being nailed on the cross by the state and by the politics, that is foreign politics, basically, and the violence that he experienced. He did it for the good of the whole human race and not just the Hebrew race. And so with that in mind, and also the liberation of African American sisters and brothers, Juneteenth, and what that all represents. Let's come to the Lord's table, bearing the fact that we too, in our little and multiple ways, representing the human race, and may we ever keep in mind for the whole human race as well as we partake of the Lord's table. Let's break the bread, the Lord's body. Let's eat. Then let's partake of Christ's blood shed for us. Amen.
Thank you, everyone,